Australia's latest national defence strategy was unveiled on Thursday, with more money for drones and missiles, ongoing funding for the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines, and an unapologetic defence of the US alliance, and the rules-based order from Richard Marles. The Defence Minister's trying to hold support for the alliance at a time when a lot of Australians are growing uneasy about the relationship because of Donald Trump. His war against Iran, his wild threats to wipe out an entire civilization, his daily berating of allies, including Australia, have all raised understandable concerns. But Richard Marles argues this alliance is fundamental to Australia's national security. Is he right? Or should Australia be rethinking its position? And does this latest national defence strategy do enough to prepare us for the dangerous world we're in? I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. When it comes to all matters defence and the US alliance, few have a deeper understanding than Kim Beazley. A long-serving Defence Minister during the Hawke Government, a long-serving Labor leader in opposition, a former Australian ambassador to the United States, and now chair of the Australian War Memorial. Kim Beazley, welcome.
Good to be with you again, David, after some time.
It's been too long. It's been too long. Look,
yeah.
A great opportunity to pick your brains. And before we do get into the new strategy, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the environment that it's trying to respond to. We've been hearing for a while this is the most dangerous environment since World War II, largely because of the military build-up of China, Russia's war in Ukraine. Now we also have this American president acting in ways that I guess we haven't really witnessed before. How would you characterise the strategic outlook Australia is facing?
And also, as Richard pointed out yesterday, more combat is taking place around the globe today than ever before since World War II. So, challenging is how you describe the current environment for anybody who happens to be in government. And I think that was well reflected yesterday in the speech that the Defence Minister made. It was actually a very fine speech, which ought to be read in terms of what can a middle power do and what ought a middle power do in the contemporary era. And so you could study it from that point of view. Of course, everybody gets stuck into it, and there is never, and let me tell you, as a former Defence Minister, there is never enough spent on defence. And
that's a consistent theme.
And I've got to tell you, in peacetime, it's extremely hard to sit down with your counterparts in the government and prize out of them what you need for your purposes, because your purposes are invariably middle to long term. Theirs are invariably what's happening now and what is politically going to mob us at the next election. And it's not a winning atmosphere, let me tell you, if you have to be a Defence Minister.
I'm sure that's right. Look, the challenge I touched on right now, though, is Donald Trump. Look, he's entered this war without consulting allies. He's now having a go at allies for not helping. How should Australia, as a middle power, reliant on this alliance, how should we be navigating this?
Well, there are many things that you have to do in the circumstances in which you find yourself. Amongst journalists, historians, academics, population generally, we can say anything we like about the bloke, and we do say anything we like about the bloke. If you happen to be in government, any government, but including this government, is you don't poke the bear, and you don't do it unless you have an absolute reason to do it. You don't run a commentary service on him because there's nothing to gain from it.
You're not in government, though. What do you say about the bloke? How do you describe what we're seeing from this president?
Well, I'd use that word again, challenge. It's very difficult to operate with a bloke who his modus operandi is a constant shifting of ground, and in the same paragraph, two contradictory positions being announced, and seems to be permanently on social media. It's it's very difficult. I think that the government does it as well as any government can, and I think that the position that we have with the Gulf at the moment is, I think, by him quite unfairly characterised. Apart from not actually asking us for anything specific, we actually do have a commitment in the Gulf. Now, we have in the Gulf the world's best battle management aircraft. It is there at the invitation of the United Arab Emirates. But in case folk hadn't noticed, there are two prominent riparian states to the Straits of Hormuz, Oman and Iran. But there's another one, admittedly it's the top end of it, and that happens to be UAE. And UAE is, so if you're defending UAE, if you're doing things for them, you're effectively doing it for the Straits.
Right.
And
because I don't think this is appreciated.
It's not at all appreciated.
No.
It's not appreciated. It's not appreciated by the Australian media, let me tell you. I would have thought when we went into UAE, there would have been a much more discussion of the effect of that. But clearly, what is not generally focused on by the Australian media is also not generally focused on by Mr. Trump.
So what should we understand about this plane and what it's doing? Because surveillance plane is the shorthand, but what is it actually doing?
Surveillance plane. It's a surveillance plane, but it's a surveillance plane of just about everything. It is massively better than the American E3, so much so that the Americans have started to acquire it. They put their own little tricks on it, but basically it's the Australian plane. I mean, we are really very good in an inventive sort of way in the defence area, particularly in the high-tech area. So you can see it with Ghost Shark and Ghost Bat. That's in the unmanned aircraft and underwater operation and surface operation too. We're good, we're inventive and effective.
So this plane
one of these
would
effective
be,
things, the E7.
Yeah, and that would be helping the US in its operations in the Strait?
Well, it's indivisible. I mean, you've got rockets being fired, missiles being fired at UAE and drones, and it picks them all up. And of course, it's transmitting to everybody running the defence of the Gulf. And guess who is? It happens to be the US. So, yes, they'd pick up on the stuff that we are doing for the UAE. And what we're doing for the UAE is very broadly helpful in the Gulf.
Just look, one more question on the US alliance, though. I mean, you're someone who's spent a lifetime working on improving this alliance, a strong supporter of the alliance. Do you worry about the Australian mood on this at the moment during this second Trump administration and, I guess, slipping support for the alliance, where that could go to?
Yes, I do worry about where that could potentially go because we absolutely have to sustain it. It's much more important to us now than it was when I happened to be Defence Minister, and it was important then. But now it's absolutely vital because really, particularly when it comes to things like acquiring targets and understanding what's coming at you in the region and what's essential for the immediate manoeuvring in your defence, we can't do without them. But we can't possibly afford to replicate the systems that we are now locked into. And that's that is going to be so for ever and a day. You add to that what the region expects of us. Now, a lot of people in the region will take lumps off us for the character of our relationship with the United States. But they're all, apart from China, very grateful that we do it because we are a interlocutor, if you like, between the region and the United States. Now, they all have their own relationships with the United States, but they understand the depth of the relationship that we have, which is much deeper than any of them have. And therefore, they know they conceivably have a conduit to the United States through us.
And on AUKUS and the nuclear-powered submarines, I guess there are two main concerns. One is a doubt that we'll ever see them. And the second is that it locks us in even more strongly to the alliance. What do you say to that?
Well, we're locked in strongly to the alliance anyway. It's sort of like slicing bits of a salami to try and slice things away. And it's the submarines are vital. the submarines is the modern capital ship of a navy. We've not had a capital ship since 1921. We had a capital ship in the HMAS Australia battle cruiser during World War One, and this is what a capital ship does. The opening of the war in 1914-15, the Germans put a cruiser squadron through to the southern part of the Eastern Pacific, and it sank a British cruiser squadron. They then got, as it turned out, a piece of false information, and that was the HMAS Australia was on its way, and they immediately ran for their lives because they were outgunned, out-armoured and outpaced by the Australia. They went round to the Falklands Islands and thought, oh, good, we'll make a mess of this. And to their horror, they discovered they're up against a British fleet which just happened to be down there, and it included two sisters of HMAS Australia, and they were very quickly dispatched, all of them. So that's that's of course in that era. But now,
you're saying the nuclear-powered, like a Virginia-class submarine, can't be beaten.
No. And, so we look at all these photographs and the like of, Chinese ships coming around our area, or the potential for hostile activity to take place in our region. Well, frankly, if anyone comes down here and operates like that, and we happen to have a few nuclear submarines, it's good night, nurse. That's that's what's for them. So we're lucky. I tried several times as Defence Minister, then Ambassador, to get access to the American nuclear submarines for us. And I was told repeatedly, nope, you're not going there. We don't dispense these submarines to anybody. And Rickover was extremely upset when we gave technology to the British, and we're certainly not going to give it to anyone else. So I took the view that, well, while it would be very desirable to have them, we weren't going to get them. But it ended up we have, or at least we've got the promise of them. And the sorts of resources that we have to put into it in terms of construction and basing and the like, well, we're doing it. In fact, we'll have a capacity to really do some useful work to keep going at sea American submarines at HMAS Sterling here, and that will be and that will be very useful for us ultimately, but extremely useful for the US now, and it's also part of the deterrence.
And are you confident that the US will actually hand them over? Will they get their own production rate of these Virginia-class subs up to the point where they can afford to hand them over?
Well, I'm a praying man, David, and
Has it come to that?
It does get a mention in my prayers.
Right. Okay. You are a true believer. And what about that? Just the argument that what we've seen in Ukraine and now the Middle East is these cheap drones and missiles, but cheap drones are the way of modern warfare. Do they make big, heavy, expensive kit like a nuclear-powered submarine obsolete? How do they fit in with modern warfare?
Well, very deftly, I have to say, and something for us to be concerned about, and something for us to replicate, and we are. That was made very clear by the minister in his speech, and of course in the report, and it's something that we join in on. But sometimes those are not only drones useful in themselves, but also as additions to a manned operation. So, for example, the Ghost Bat. Well, the Ghost Bat is, again, world's best practice in terms of drone-like aircraft. But you can fly them in conjunction with an F-35. And so you massively enhance the capacity of your air fleet without actually expending more in lives. Yes, there are all sorts of threats to a nuclear-powered submarine, but the thing about, and that includes the possibility of underwater drones like the one we're getting or we've invented, the Ghost Shark. Yes, that's a threat to nuclear-powered submarines. It's a threat to any adversary's nuclear-powered submarines. But the thing the nuclear-powered submarine has got is the ability to disappear rapidly and to attack from a distance. So there's always going to be an underwater fight, and everything is vulnerable, but some things are less vulnerable than most, and nuclear-powered submarines are less vulnerable than most.
So on this new national defence strategy, I mean, it's not a revolution. I guess it's an evolution on the one we had 2 years ago. More drones, more money for drones, missiles, homemade missiles, getting into hypersonic missiles. What do you like about the new strategy, and is there anything that worries you at all that we're underdone on?
We're underdone on everything, but we have something of everything, and that's important because it means we know how to use everything. And that means that should a war break out, then we do know what we need to build up, and we do know how we need to use it. And the missiles in that regard are, as well as enormously important. One of the things that's happened in this Middle Eastern conflict, we can see, is how rapidly you use your missiles. And we're going to be... We're already in missile production now, and we'll be producing more and different types of missiles, and we just need them in their thousands. That's the lesson of one of the big lessons of the Iran war.
Well, they're running down the missile stockpile very quickly, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and that's a problem. Now but also it's in a sense a plus for us, because we can build missiles for other people as well as ourselves. We can build those missiles for the US and sell them to the Americans. It's useful for the economics of our defence industry.
I'm sure some people might be worried about how they might be used by the US, but I suppose that's a separate point. On this argument about defence spending as a percentage of GDP, I'm not sure back in your day when you were Defence Minister, was that a thing? It seems to be a much more important benchmark that certainly the US is using to score how allies are performing on defence spending. Do you think this is the right way to go?
It wasn't in my day. In my day, we did not talk about percentages of GDP. We were at in the time of the 1987 White Paper, we were at 2.6% of GDP, and we varied between 2.6 and 3 and had done since the 1970s, because the 1970s saw us draw down from Vietnam, where it was 4.6, and we got down to really 2.5 to 3. That's measured, if you like, in arrears. We never talked about it. What we talked about was the base of baseline expenditure. Now, when I went into the ERC as a minister, you go in with what was the defence base, and that was last year's expenditure adjusted for inflation. That was that was the sort of starting point, and then you argued a betterment factor of 1 to 3% of the previous defence budget. So you'd always be going in to argue about whether or not you ought to get a 1% or a 3% increase. Most of the time, the forward estimates had us at about the 2 or 3. So you're arguing against that, or the reduction of that from the forward estimates. Keating used to say to me, or said to me once anyway, because I complained that I was always the last in before the ERC as Defence Minister. And he said, "Oh, it's like this, Kim. I work out what it is I need to make the psychology of the budget effective, and I take it off you." That was the view that he held at the time. So I wasn't in there arguing for 2.5s or 3s or whatever, but that's what I got. I got 2.5, between 2.5 and 3% of GDP budget after budget. 2.9 was the best I did, I think.
So, look, however you measure it now, whether we've now shifted to this NATO measurement, which does include things like military pensions and other things, we're now at 2.8%. We'll get to 3% in 2033, we're told. Bottom line, is that enough?
Bottom line is, well done. Please give Richard more money. That'd be the view I'd take to that. I actually think I hadn't realised it until the discussion that ensued here, that there was a substantially different way of calculating things with, well, not substantially different, a bit different way of calculating things with NATO. I think it's sensible to use the NATO benchmark, because those are the countries that we really compare ourselves with in terms of military outlays. We compare ourselves with them, even though it's the region that we keep an eye on. So it's a useful measure that the rest of the world can effectively understand. So I think it's not a bad thing to shift to, but you do need to realise that probably you'll need a bit more money while you're doing that.
Is there a figure you've got in mind? Like, should we be 3.5%? What do you think?
Well, of course, mate. Of course, I would think that. That's standard pattern, and I would think that we need to spend more on defence. But I understand why we don't. Comparatively with the Europeans, we are not big spenders publicly. And it's also in the money raised. We're not big raisers, and so if you like, if you look at our income tax, personal and business tax, we actually are much the same as European rates. Where the difference is in indirect taxes. So we've got a 10% GST on most things. They have in Europe, EU, average 21% on everything. That's where the difference is. That's why they have such big social spending. And that's why they don't do much means testing or assets testing of social benefits. We do. We are very avid at means testers. And of course, it means that we have few resources for all public purposes. We don't think this about ourselves, I have to say. We think about ourselves that, the government's got huge amounts of money and it wastes it, or we don't want to spend more on this and that. But then when you come down to any particular public purpose that you care to name, be it in any of the various areas of health spending, be it in our education, a public education system, be it the universities, whatever, everybody says we don't have enough. And I think in terms of salience, defence gets massive salience when you're at war and virtually no salience when you're at peace. And so to get to 3.5, which would be very desirable, I find that it's hard to see us doing that short of a really obvious immediate threat. And then, of course, in today's world, that may be too late.
Well, indeed. And look, just to finish up and come back to, I suppose, where we began, the rules-based order that we've heard a lot about, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, I think, has described it as a polite fiction. We need to move on. Richard Marles yesterday was strongly defending it. He doesn't want to give up on it. Where do you sit on this? Is it something that still exists? Do you think the big powers still respect, though, the rules-based order?
Don't give up on it, because the rules-based order is vastly more important to medium-sized powers than it is to great powers. And it's not a good thing that people think that it's tradable or get rid of. The rules-based order is essential. Now, having said that, you have to be aware that when you're planning your defence, you don't plan it around the confidence that everybody around you is going to observe the rules-based order. You actually have to take account of what they're capable of as more than what their intentions might be. Intentions are for diplomats, capabilities are for defence ministers. So we have to keep that the absence of a rules-based order in mind when we're looking at what we ought to be doing with our own defences. But as operators, activists in the international political system, we should defend it till hell freezes over. And it's very important. Richard, the Minister, used a really quite delightful example as to the effectiveness of it. And that was the line to which Indonesian fishermen do not cross. And they don't. And as he said, he's seen it himself and flying over it on his way to Southeast Asia. It is observed meticulously by quite ordinary folk in Indonesia, and very much to our advantage that it is. And we just need to do the best we can to keep the rules-based order going while preparing for the fact or the possibility or the probability that in many ways it won't be.
Yeah, that's the uncertainty of the world that we live in. Kim Beazley, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
And good to chat to you again too, David. Terrific. I look forward to many future opportunities.
Me too. Well, we'll have more on all this on Insiders. Richard Marles will be my guest. Hope you can join us Sunday morning on ABC TV. PK will be back in the Politics Now podcast feed on Monday. Bye for now.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.